We will now move on to the final panel discussion for the day, which is oil and gas sector looking beyond COVID-19. We have with us today for this session, Mr. Vinod S. Shenoy, Director Refineries HPCL, Mr. Gautam Reddy, MD, India and Bangladesh, Schlumberger, Mr. E.S. Ranganathan, Director Marketing, GAIL, Mr. Rajesh Kumar Srivastav, Director Exploration, ONGC, and Mr. Oscar Quintero, Chief Operating Officer, Kane Oil and Gas, Vedanta Limited. The session will be moderated by Anirban Mukherjee from BCG. Anirban, can I request you to take this forward?
Thank you, Kaushiki. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Pipi, for having us and setting up the event and the panel. And good afternoon, just about. Good afternoon to everybody and welcome to the panel discussion on oil sector looking beyond COVID. The COVID crisis, of course, a watershed in our lives. And as they say that there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are months when decades happen. And this is the part of our lives when possibly we are going through such months. And the past few months have perhaps precipitated some of the changes which will fundamentally alter the way we look at business, the way we look at operations, the way we look at planning. So just to set the stage, while we are all aware of the impending crisis, just wanted to talk through a few trends, or rather competing trends, specific to oil that we are looking at, which could be instrumental in shaping the future. So on the one hand, the COVID has brought about an increased awareness towards the planet, which could precipitate or alter the way we look at hydrocarbons and maybe bring about some of the technologies or changes which we have been long discussing about, whether it is things like LNG in mobility, hydrogen as a fuel, relooking at the hydrocarbon molecule itself, and where will that get placed, and so on. But at the same time, while there is a climate consciousness coming, an altering trend could be some of the themes we are relooking at mobility, or personal mobility, for example, and the need to the moving away in some way from the shared economy. And these trends we are seeing in the US, where, for example, second-hand car sales are through the roof, or we are looking a coming back of plastics and petrochemicals as we look at disposable items gaining more and more popularity. So these are some of the competing trends that we are seeing. Then again, there is a trend about digital and technology, and not just work from home, but things about like artificial intelligence and machine learning, some of which was touched upon in the previous panel. And just to be sure, artificial intelligence, machine learning, these technologies work best when there is a significant amount of increased uncertainty, variables playing along, multivariate analysis requiring which the mind cannot process. Traditionally, oil and gas has been a more stable sector. Going forward, as we look at demand patterns changing, we look at compressed margins, we look at different products moving at different paces. Would this be a time when finally we could start embracing the AI and MLs, which oil sector traditionally has been a bit of a laggard compared to other sectors? The fourth is trend I would say is the one where the uncertainty has brought into focus for a planet that was really focused on growth, the need to be resilient. And that cuts across supply chain, the way we look at our human resources, even the way we look at collaboration. As a planet faces a more risky future, will this foster some of the collaboration on technologies, on supply chain that we have not seen earlier, and especially in oil and gas and India in specific, some of the collaborations that possibly we have not paid as much, kept them in the center as earlier. And finally, India. As a country, we will be growing, we will be consuming more and more energy, but at the same time, we will likely continue to import. So will India move at a different pace or a different trend than the rest of the world as we come out of this crisis? So some of these themes to lay out, but the focus of this panel discussion would be to think about some of these slightly medium to long-term changes and the fundamental shifts that each of our sectors could come across. And to discuss this, I think we have a truly rich senior and a diverse panel. And we have Mr. Srivastav, who is looking at exploration, which is the bed and the source of growth in oil and gas. We have Mr. Ranganathan, who is looking at the oil ecosystem and and the big question about transitioning of India specifically towards a gas-based economy. Mr. Shenoy, who's possibly closest to the consumer on the refinery side and directly impacted by the day-to-day trends that we are seeing on the oil and gas product side. And of course, Gautam, who comes from the services side. And as Gautam says, that we possibly the OFS in some way lags the operator investments. So he'll be tracking a lot of that, the recovery as we move forward. So without any further ado, I'd like to start off the discussion. And to start off with, let me go to the source of growth, like we said, Mr. Srivastava, and to talk about what you see as the next few years looking at for the oil sector from both recovery side and also as an explorer. How do you see the investments going on, which will define how the next phase of growth comes about?
Thanks, Anirban, for giving me opportunity to be on this platform. And yes, as you said, let me begin with your comment. The events that we were witness to in the past few months, and these, if we can say, they are basically testimony to grand design of unpredictability. Nature of exploration as well as oil and gas business as such, if we look into the scenario that is playing out in terms of whether oil prices, gas prices, or geopolitical issues. So now, in these past few months, these events which have unfolded, they have impacted, we are witness to that, impacted global economy. There were issues related to personal fronts on tragedies and griefs on personal front, as well as the global economy was taken for a tailspin. Now, as far as this easing of lockdown started, economies, though, yes, they are living back. But now let me go back a little bit earlier prior to the COVID period. What was the scenario which was playing out for oil and gas sector as such? At that point of time, we were referring to it as energy transition. The people were trying to address the issues related to climate change. The efforts were to go more green. And these disruptive technologies like EVs and other things were talked about. They were emerging on the scenario apart from other renewables. So now what happened in reference to that? This COVID came. Now in COVID further, there was a demand disruption, though on account of different reasons. And then there was a supply glut, oil prices came down. So people started working on a different way. In the sense, capex cut were thought to be one scenario where everybody was saying like that. But was it not earlier? Equinor, which was a Statoil with a design to be more green, it changed, Statoil changed into Equinor. Now we have seen few days back or few weeks back, BP's announcement, like cutting down 40%, going more green. And this too, that too for a company which discovered somewhere oil in 1908 in Iran and was one of the biggest one, now cutting down by 40%. So everybody is changing and trying to address the issues which are emerging on account of consideration for environment, consideration to reduce the carbon emissions, but notwithstanding, this cannot be equated on a one-to-one basis with a scenario in India with BP and others. Now here we know many predictions are there by different energy pundits, like for India, if we say, obviously, and not only India, let me say for global scenario also, oil and gas is going to be there. Their demand is going to be there. More so for India, emerging economies going towards making for Atmanirbhar, this bringing in here infrastructure creation will require energy in some sort or another. And as you said, coming back of plastics and other related, so that hydrocarbons are going to be there. This is one thing. And now we also know that this is a bedrock. That means the results from the exploration are going to cater to production in a future with a time lag of 5 to 7 years. If I can relate that, ONGC, when we embarked upon this energy strategy scenario 2040, we were planning to address consumption issues and supporting domestic production. And we were targeting some range from 50 from present to 70 in 2040. Now, in reaching to that figure, the component which was required to supplement that much of production in the last 10 years period is most of it is going to come from the, which led ONGC to participate in a resource assessment. It led ONGC to be a party to the National Seismic Program. Though on one hand, companies are trying to cut down the capex and other thing in exploration. But let me tell you, for Indian scenario, this had been a blessing also in disguise in a sense. The same acreages you got for lesser competition while committing the lesser expenditure outgo for exploration. So if we look during these few OLP rounds where you acquire acreages, so ONGC had been able to acquire about 44,000 of square kilometer of acreage, which would be taken up with the three basic variables. Number one, with a view to open new areas, with a view to open new and tough plays in the existing basins, and with a view to consolidate what we have found during the last few years and consolidate their yield. In that regard, as far as ONGC is concerned, the exploration is going to be our focus. And if I can just give you some numbers, we will be spending somewhere around 8,000 crores as far as the exploration is going on, which is more than the 6,000 amount that we spent last year in 1920. So this year our seismic program will be more, and that too, this is because of trying to squeeze in turnaround time from exploration to the discovery in the new acreages that we have got. And it would be good to know that in certain of the acreages, ONGC has been able to complete our surveys in the first year itself. So that focus is going to remain for ONGC. And these exploration events are going to continue as far as the exploration's role in supporting the future production is concerned. So that is going to be there. Now, we have already said that being a NOC, being a national oil company, its mandate is somewhat different than other private operators. In a sense, we look for supporting the energy security, maybe at profit may not be the primary criteria when it comes to opening of the new acreages, opening of the new place and bringing new basins. So this is going to be the prime strategy and driving force for continuing exploration in ONGC. So this is what is, I can say, for ONGC's efforts in continuing the exploration in that way. And as you said, technologies definitely will be coming into play. And I believe I will close my opening statement here and then we'll come back again.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastava. I think that's a very important point to make, that in oil and gas, the investment cycles are so long ranged that so long as we have a view on the growing consuming economy for India and our materiality of our resources, the investment in exploration and finding new resources is a given, and we have to plan our cycles according to that. And that brings me, I think, to, as we track the consumption side of things, and let me go to Mr. Shenoy, who's on the refining, petrochemical, and more retail demand side. And my question to you is on the growth as we look at coming out of COVID-19. How do you see the demand pattern and the growth cycle changing on the consuming side, on the retail, petrochemical, and downstream side? Mr. Shenoy, I think you'll have to unmute your mic. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Anirban. Good afternoon to everyone. As far as the demand side, coming straight to the question, we have in the initial stages of this, right from the last week of March, going into April, we did see a huge demand destruction, right up to 70%. And but we have also seen that in the later part of May and June, as the agricultural activity picked up, as life came back to normal, or near normal, I should say, in many districts of the country, and the unlock phases started, we are back to 70 to 80% of the demand as of now. We feel that the stable number going forward could be 80% upwards. But we are looking at this financial year, probably there will be some demand resurrection, that probably will have to wait for a couple of things. We'll have to really see how the stimulus of the government and other measures work out, how the unlockdown in the major cities and people come back to normal mobility. We expect that to happen from October onwards. And by the end of the year, in the fourth quarter, we see demand going beyond 80, touching around 90%. So we are hopeful. And as you would have seen, as far as HPCL is concerned, we did maintain 100% run on our refinery capacity. And we did manage to keep the entire supply chain in operation despite the many challenges. So we see the demand already picked up across product ranges, both retail and direct sale products like bitumen, solvents, and specialties, lubes. We did the highest lube sales in any given month or any given quarter for all these years. So there are shades of green and yellow, though the dark shade did dominate April and May. So I think things are getting brighter and we are hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shenoy. And I think just closing the roundup on oil and gas and investment. So let me come to you, Gautam, as you would be closely tracking the recovery and on the back of the recovery, the investments that are going in the sector. And what we heard from Mr. Srivastava and Mr. Shenoy, clear green shoots, different colors of green coming back up. How do you see the recovery happening? And maybe if you can touch both what you're seeing as Schlumberger globally and how do you see that playing out in India?
Thanks, Anirban, and thanks to FIPI for this opportunity, and thanks to all my esteemed co-panelists. So yeah, I'll just, I basically pretty much what Srivastava and Vinay Saab have just said it, right? There is clear recovery going ahead. We were just looking at the global numbers as well recently. Yes, April was a bit of a shocker to the whole system. I think depends on who you talk to. The global demand fell to 82 to 85 million barrels. So 15, 18% destruction over 45 days, which is really never seen before event. But the good part is that recovery in May also was equally sharp, May and June. Our estimate is right now the globe is consuming around, depends again, we'll never really know until 2-3 months later. But July demand, we estimate is somewhere around 93, 94 million barrels, which is quite significant, which was what the world was consuming in 2009 or 10 probably, right? Okay. And by end of 2020, we believe the world, 2021, this is around, let's say 16, 17 months from now, we believe the world will be back to consuming around the 100 million barrel mark that we were at recently, right? Okay, just before this whole thing hit us. Yeah, so that's what we see, because demand is a key indicator for all of us in this industry, right? Okay. Now, there are going to be a few important aspects to this. We believe the destruction of supply in US this time is going to be for a lot longer term compared to what it was in the previous downturns that we've seen, right? There's a very, very severe destruction of supply in the US because fundamentally they have never been able to deliver cash flow to their investors, right? But somehow the investments kept having faith in the industry there, but now they are demanding that a typical business positive cash flow returns be seen, which I think is now clearly understood that it is not just because of COVID or the demand issues, but fundamentally there's at a $40-50 oil regime, it's going to be difficult out there, right? So I think that is going to be an issue, right? So that will mean that the international producers will have to come out with filling that gap, right? I think so. So in the short term, yeah, in the next 1.5 years, yes, it's going to be painful for all of us. But if the world has to produce 100 million barrels in 18 months from now, and we all know this, that we have seen when everyone says something, the opposite exactly happens in our industry, right? So those are the fundamental aspects globally that we see is going to be of a concern, right? And a lot of capex cuts are indeed happening. We are seeing around 30% across the world, analyzing all our clients, the NOCs, the IOCs, and everyone. That's a significant destruction, and we know oil wells are not, they're not water wells, right? So that kind of a shutdown in capex will have some repercussions, say 3 to 4 years down the future, definitely. Now, another interesting aspect, and I always say this, right, because even my daughters keep challenging me as to why am I in this industry? It's not green, So it's always a question that's raised. But now, I would again like to quote Mr. Patrick Pouyanné, the Total CEO, who was here last year, in the discussion with him. A very interesting fact. I repeatedly state this. Late 90s, the globe's energy was 81% met through fossil fuels, natural gas, coal, petroleum, crude, whatever. 25 years of massive renewables and everything come into play, solar and everything else. Last year, it was still 81% from fossil fuels. Right? The mix changed, coal went down, gas went up, right? So the whole transition to the green energy, we all want it, but we cannot view it as a zero-sum game, right? Where someone wins or someone loses. There's a lot of economies, there's a lot of lives at stake. It cannot be a switch. I think we all have to realize this, especially our young friends here joining us. It will have to be a very phased, planned transition. Right? I lived for 3 years in Africa, and I can tell you there that if they don't get their kerosene or whatever, a lot of lives will face difficulty on a day-to-day basis. So we cannot turn the tap off tomorrow. It will be a phased transition, right? Renewables are growing, and we welcome that, but we all have to work together so that the world energy demand eventually is met, right? And the COVID situation will eventually solve. We all know this. It's not going to be far out, right? So I think that's something, a perspective we all need to keep in mind. Last point, again, like Srivastava Sahab said, in India is very unique, right? I think, again, probably Shanazav and Ranganathan Sahab will know this better, but I believe we are back almost at 3.8, 3.7 million barrel consumption today in India, right out from the 4.5 we were at, right? Now, we still are effectively producing around 720,000 barrels. So India will always want to produce, right? India will have to produce. That's the Prime Minister's vision. That's the Oil Minister's vision, right? So India will be in a unique position. The price will be mandated by what happens globally. But at a decent price in the 40-50 range, I think there will always be an endeavor from all the operators in India to produce, because they don't have a demand problem, right? There will always be a demand for their product. Always. The government wants them to produce more. And as part of the whole Atmanirbhar vision of our Honorable Prime Minister, I think we all have a stake in that to make sure that happens and increase production here. So I'm pretty positive about it. It's a tough time, but I'm sure we'll come out of it. It's not the first time. This is my 5th downturn in 22 years now. I've seen 2, 3 big ones, 2 small ones, but we will manage. Yeah.
Thanks, Gautam, and thank you for cueing us into the topic which is of top of mind for many people is the bit about energy transition. And nobody better to speak about that than Mr. Ranganathan. So I'll ask Mr. Ranganathan a couple of thoughts there. So one is, I think you also mentioned that, Gautam, is when we talk about energy transition, often we talk about fuel replacement, but actually it's not. It's fuel addition. That as a growing consumer economy, new fuels get added. That does not mean the old fuels get replaced. But as we talk about transition, and gas has been often on the center of that discussion. We have been talking about moving to a 15% basket, gas-based economy, new technologies on gas, which sound very exciting around LNG and CNG and so on. But given that now COVID has precipitated the discussion on clean fuel, on climate, Mr. Ranganathan, your thoughts on how do you see this playing out, and what would be the impact on our ability to penetrate more gas and more gas consumption into both the consuming economy and also in the industry and commercial side?
Good afternoon, Anirban. Good afternoon, my co-panelists, and good afternoon, participants. Thank you, FIPPI, for providing this forum. Yes, COVID was definitely a very unimagined, event, and has affected, the effect also has been impact, both geographical spread and magnitude has been quite high. And it has, well, I would say that there was complete stoppage of economic activity for, around 2-3 months, depending on the field you are in. But then I am seeing that we have seen the shoots of, recovery in our gas consumption, and because we supply both to bulk as well as the city gas distribution, and GAIL has been handling some 113 million cubic meters per day pre-COVID. Now we have come back to more or less 95% of that level. But there has been some demand destruction in the transportation segment, which has affected the CGD as well as the refinery. When the refineries are not working, the gas also not consumed. And to a lesser degree, the manufacturing, especially in the MSME sector, has been affected due to basically the manpower restrictions which is there post-COVID. But in my opinion, it is going to come back to 100% level by the end of this quarter. And what we can see is a recovery curve, which is coming, because CGD, which is affected, has a advantage that it has now is on the cusp of a very huge explosion in growth, because 477, see last year if you see, there's some close to 475 CNG stations has been added and 12 lakh households which has been added last year. This is phenomenal because new players have come. So the demand restriction is offset by increase in the geographical reach. And also we have seen that the spot LNG prices are very low. And this low price actually should fuel consumption increase in consumption, especially in the sector, where more polluting fuels are to be replaced with natural gas. So this low price will be a added incentive for the industries to switch over to gas. And I expect some expansion in the gas demand because of that. And also now people are thinking, we were on a very conservative side. Big customers were taking 90% long-term and 10% spot LNG purchases. Now they are looking at expanding the portfolio in spot LNG by increasing it to 30%, or some people are at 40%. And the demand is bound to grow. And I expect that by this financial year end, the gas consumption has to be back to normal.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ranganathan. I think, let to change gears a little bit. A collective view coming out is that while COVID had severely impacted demand, both on the oil and gas side, more than green shoots of recovery, possibly next quarter, but definitely by end of year, we are looking at a reasonable amount of demand recovery and investments. In which case, let's collectively agree that especially given India and the oil sector, in spite of a major dent, in spite of a clear crisis, we will come out. We will come out of this. We'll survive. And as they say, that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So taking that cue on, that how are we using this crisis to make ourselves stronger, that make ourselves more prepared for the future, and maybe even use it as an advantage. And let me go back to Mr. Srivastava. You are looking at, and I remember one of the discussions I had with you, that going forward, it's not about if the oil remains at $40 or $45 or $50. It's not about exploring less. It is about exploring more efficiently. And so what would be your thoughts on what could be some of the fundamental changes this could bring in the way we look at investment and capex and exploration, both from your personal view, but also as ONGC?
So again, coming back to the issues and the impacts and how the future scenario as far as the exploration is going to play, it is definite that under this current scenario, the processes are to be made more efficient. Success per amount of spent has to be more. Yield for per dollar spent has to be more. So these are the fundamentals. Now, how to go about them to implement it into your day-to-day processes? So first thing what happens is the efforts starts around making the use of digitalization in terms of centralizing the processes. Better efficiency, better inventory management, and better supply chain solutions. If you take it from a digital perspective in a centralized way with less human intervention, number one. Number two, as far as the exploration, interpretation, and processing is concerned, intelligent solutions are there. And let me tell you, at a company level, we have tested, and probably the technology we will be inducting in a larger scale. On a pilot, we have carried out 3 projects of, let us say, 100 GB size each, and which used to take about 1 month. By giving 2 persons that project, it used to take about 1 month. Now that can be done in a day. So those software solutions are available. Some projects we have already tested, and it gives better results in a lesser time without compromising on the quality aspect. So this is one change that is going to come. Similar is on processing side. Second thing is when we do for reservoir characterization issues, which finally leads to increase the yield from the producing field. So as you said, the oil and gas industry had been a little laggard in adopting AI and machine learning. So let me tell you, it was not because of any other reason. If I can give you an example, right, somewhere in 2000 at least, 2000, 2001 or 2, I will be sure, there were techniques available which were taken from medical side in training the neurons. Similar technology was available. You give some information, train those neurons, they look for the data, and then they give you a prediction in terms of how those distributions are there. So the reason is why it could not be implemented was the kind of data that was required for them. And probably the collection of that data at that cost was making it little less to go. So those issues will still be there to address the technology induction, but at what cost? Obviously it will be there, and in the current scenario, it will be more pertinent. So though it may be a little slower, the required one will be implemented. All those projects, that means you will have to trade off and then think about what is vital, what is essential, what is desirable, and then go ahead on that. So this is what the process is being adopted in ONGC, and this is what we are going. And similarly, now different EOR techniques, obviously through digitalization, through additional processes, it will be implemented. And one topic that you touched, not only work from home, but work from home facilitation would also be thought of. It will reduce commuting if that is going to happen. If in some way you can contribute in keeping the demand low from Indian perspective rather than paying more as an import bill. So all those issues would be there. Probably it may be in a futuristic scenario, it will come. Another issue that I foresee implementation is collaboration with good technology partners or good experts all across the world. So in that regard, there is one consortium. This is from exploration side, attribute assisted seismic processing and interpretation. This is an ASPI. This is by basically ConocoPhillips School of Geology and Geosciences. And this is by University of Oklahoma. And that members of this consortium are BHP, Billiton, BP, Shell, Exxon, anybody you name it, it is there in that. Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ENI, BP, Shell, and Petrobras also. So this is another effort that we are trying, and very soon ONGC would also be member of this consortium. So apart from this talent pool, by roping in some CSIR emeritus scientists which can be part of our projects, that is also being thought of. So these changes are likely to come, which will finally be aimed, and they will result, my personal opinion, they will result in improving efficiency, and they will result in giving me the results also. So some of those which have been implemented, I will be proudly saying, we have increased our exploratory success rate to the level of 48% in the last year. So all these things will definitely be under implementation and will lead to more.
Thank you, Mr. Srivastava. I think that's an interesting point you made on that, on the some of the technological advances that we've had. And if I look at some of the at-scale new technologies, they often come on the back of deep crisis when the need arises, whether it is radar or sonar, telegraph, penicillin. I think so. This crisis also possibly will push us into looking at the next wave of technology. And I know, I see we have Oscar with us now. And Oscar, thanks for joining. I understand you had some technical challenges joining, but thanks a lot for joining. Let me bring you in. As Mr. Srivastava looks at the exploration, you receive the outcomes of that exploration as a producer and operator on upstream. And I think Mr. Srivastava, you touched upon some of the topics which I know is very close to your heart, which is about collaboration, technology, and cost consciousness. As we look at the world going forward, very difficult to predict, but a $40, $50 oil, higher volatility. How are you looking at some of the structural fundamental changes to bring out in the way we do business in the operations and productions in the E&P?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, sorry I was late, but I'm here now. Thanks. So good questions. For me, I would say the competitive advantage for oil and gas doesn't change regardless of the oil price. And I tell you this because the competitive advantage at the end of the day starts from the rock quality. And there's no variation on the rock quality over time. So if we are very strong at understanding how to maximize the recovery, where to drill, where to develop, and again, realize that EUR then the ultimate recovery over time. Then if that's the foundation of everything we do, then the rest is an enabler. So I will tell you what the enabler is. So let's say you fixed the foundation, right? Which is best first, best rock first, best wells first, best recovery first, best capital efficiency first. If we fix that, then the rest is an enabler. So then the rest is making money. And how we make money if we fix that. So we make money by prioritizing right, by having the right capital discipline structure, by investing in these situations, investing first on tier 1 reservoir and tier 1 economics. In the exploration point of view, investing where I can see maybe the lowest risk with the higher prospect size. And then, okay, so then once we have identified the best rock and we have prioritized, then is the extraction, the maximization of the potential. And that is done, there's nothing more strong than being efficient at drilling and completion. And in drilling and completion, right, we spend 70 or 80% of the capital. Depends on the size of the program, but unless we don't have existing infrastructure. But if that's where we spend 60, 70, 80% of the capital, there's nothing more valuable than extracting oil and gas out of that best rock than having an efficient drilling program, drilling and fracking program. So, okay, so then the next step is, how do you realize an efficient drilling and fracking program? It's all about the scale. You need to have a minimum size, a minimum scale, where now you can bring economies of scale to the program. So it is very possible that a drilling program of 2-3 rigs is cheaper than a drilling program of 1 rig. It is very possible that a drilling program where I do zipper fracking or pad drilling is significantly cheaper than a drilling program where I drill 1 well at a time. So the sizing of the program, where you baked in the learning curve and the capital efficiency associated with the size of the program, will let you basically realize the best. Now, the next enabler, once you have identified the best rock, you had the best prospect associated with the rock, you had the prioritization, you know where you're gonna expend the capital. The next one is the sizing of the program. Finally, it's all about, for me, digitalization and people, as Mr. Rajesh mentioned. Now, these are all enablers again. So with digitalization, we can do things quicker. It's amazing. Actually, our chairman said this, and I haven't thought about it until he said it multiple times. See how powerful it is, our laptop or iPad. It's a window for the whole world. We have access to everything. We have access, I can see, we have access to drilling parameters real time. We have access to fracking parameters real time. We have access to anything that happens at Mangla MPT terminal real time. It is so powerful. Digitalization cannot end at a dashboard. For me, digitalization needs to evolve from a dashboard to an end-to-end solution. So I identify the opportunities through digitalization, and I automate the actions that are needed from that analysis on digitalization. And that's where machine learning and artificial intelligence come from. So automating valves, automated systems, and operating a system under an operating envelope, and the system self-adjusting because of digital data is very critical. Hands-free adjustment is very critical, and I think that's where things needs to be all about. A dashboard on my cell phone is not enough. And then lastly, just to close, and maybe I took longer, is there's nothing more powerful than people at the end of the day. People are the one that decide where we're gonna be drilling first because it's the best rock, which is a competitive advantage. What is the size of the program? What is the capital allocation? What is the prioritization? What is the digital roadmap? What is the size of, again, how to make the drilling and fracking and the well design efficiently, how to structure the surface infrastructure, how to utilize the knowledge capacity that we have. Nothing more powerful than people. And I think, I believe, in my experience, I've worked in Russia, Indonesia, Venezuela, and the US. There's very few places I've seen the quality and the sharpness of people that here. I think India has one of the highest potential with the quality of the people to take oil and gas to a significant higher level than what it is today. And it's all about the people. If we have the right structure and we know what matters first, at the end of the day, if everybody understands that it all starts with the rock and the quality of the land that you have, then I think everything else will happen.
Thanks a lot, Oscar. That's a great perspective to have, is that the way we deploy technology and the way we deploy people and the way we prioritize, they have to catch up for us to continue to deliver in extracting the best resources that we have under the ground. And I'll be remiss not to bring in Gautam here. And while operators identify the priority order and the tier one and where to drill, you partner with them to make it happen. And I think Oscar touched upon, and Mr. Srivastava as well, on the economies of scale and capital efficiency that needs to come in. So the question to you, as you partner with operators around the world and in India, what are some of the fundamental shifts you see in this partnership models, in the way you approach the campaigns? How do you see that playing out?
Yes, thanks, again. Yeah, hello, Oscar. So, yeah, I mean, I work with Mr. Srivastava and Oscar all the time, right? Yes, we argue like in any family, but we know that we don't survive without each other, right? So, right. So we swim or sing together in any project, right? It has to be really. I mean, I think it's one of the most. I look at many industries, service providers versus operators. You know, there's construction, there's other places where, but I think we are one of the most symbiotic industries in that sense, right? We really have to, you know, each other's success drives each other. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, really, basically, there's a couple of things that have been going on in the industry, and I think they'll just get expedited with this crisis situation, right? Because, like you said, when our backs are to the wall, you know, it's human ingenuity. We always come out with something, right? Okay. And of course, the platform for us to showcase whatever thoughts or ideas we have are, of course, our clients, ONGC, Kane, they help us. In that sense, two things I think will change. One, definitely the commercial construct, right? I think there'll be more changes coming into that, right? I mean, we somehow still operate in a very rigid framework, especially in India. And I know it's driven by a lot of our government mandated rules and stuff like that. But that I think even people are realizing this, and that will change more and more. There has to be a lot more freedom, because it's very difficult, even in a very brown field. It's not a mathematical, there's a lot of science, but it's not a mathematical equation, right? Our business, right? It's very tough to decide in well 5 exploration from now what I'll need for it to be successful. It's actually very contradictory. It's exploration. So I cannot define today whatever, with all the experience of the great minds in ONGC exploration. It's exploration. So they will never be able to define what they will need or what they will want in a 5th exploration well from now, right? Okay. So I think that kind of commercial construct has to change. There has to be a lot more flexibility. And at the same time, in return for that flexibility, there have to be a lot more risk reward we as service providers have to take. We have to deliver, right? Eventually, if you don't deliver, I mean, it just cannot be that we get the flexibility without giving the results. So I think that will happen more and more in the industry, right? I think surprisingly, India has actually been at the forefront. Some of the industry models on bundled services and integrated contracts have actually started from India, you know, and it's and it's catching up, and I think it'll be more refined, and so that both parties can succeed. But I think the whole commercial construct is one area that will end with making it less rigid and more effective for both parties. And there should be responsibility and accountability in this. I think that will happen. Number 2, like I said about the whole digital thing, there's a lot of products Schlumberger is coming out with, like our other competitors, you know, are also coming out with, right? Okay. Now, as an industry, I think we have digitized a lot. I kind of try to make that distinction, digitized and digitalization. We have digitized a lot. We have taken a lot of data, and we have tons of data now on the chips now instead of on paper. But I don't think we have really scratched the surface on what to do with all this data and turn it into effective results, efficiency gains, capital gains for the operators. We haven't, right? Okay. So, I mean, again, there are examples across, but for example, you know, with the Egyptian government, we have just recently rolled this out, right? So what we took all their national data repositories, seismic and stuff, made it into a very beautiful web package. I mean, when we can go sitting at our home and buy, we have lived through the COVID on Amazons and right? Why can't it be that simple for someone to go and look at a seismic data or in Egypt or in Congo, for example, tomorrow, and you know, and ONGC can make a lot of decision making on whether to go after the prospect or not. Why can't it be simple? You know? Why does it have to be a team of 6 people going there, discussing and gathering data physically? And, you know, we can break down a lot of those barriers, right? So we are creating an enabling system, and a lot of our industry is creating, with the help of course, I know, just reading the other day, the top 3 tech companies are worth $5.5 trillion. I mean, it's like unbelievable, isn't it? In 15 years, you know, they have created so much value for themselves and for the world. So I think we need to learn from that. We need to really think out of the box, right? The solutions are coming, and I think adaptation of those solutions will happen. Whether it be different levels, right? At some levels, the solution will be just data analytics driven. Some level will be some kind of machine learning. At a certain level will be data analytics. I mean, just a simple log to analyze, right? It would need our field engineer sitting with the client and then our domain expert. It would be a 15, 20 days sometimes, and the client's irritated with us and we're like, sir, we are in Assam, we can't get to the data, you know. We really need to break all that. And there are tools for that, and the tools are being developed. And I think deployment of those tools will be expedited. So I think adopting the modern day digital technology and a more risk reward commercial construct, I think these 2 things will have to happen in the industry going forward.
Thanks, thanks a lot, Gautam. I think on that note of embracing technology and digital, let me go to Mr. Shenoy and a couple of thoughts there. One thing that has been talked about for many years now, and I think the discussion keeps heating up possibly of late, is this digital in refinery and some of the things that we talked about in the upstream context, which is use of AI, ML technology for more efficient operations. In terms of the sheer data that a refinery uses on the day-to-day basis is also significant. And so that is on the digitization side. And second is also new technologies. And I already see some questions coming up, crude to chemical and some of the other ways that the downstream sector could start looking very different, the downstream of tomorrow. So Mr. Shenoy, some of your thoughts on both your views on the embracing of technology, digitization or new downstream technologies. I think you used the term of repurposing the molecules, and also how is HPCL looking at it going forward?
Yeah, you in your question, you painted a very wide canvas. I'll try to be brief. As far as technology is concerned, I think the refineries in India and HPCL in particular, we are on this journey for the last 40 years, where relays have given way to microprocessors to distributed control systems to advanced process control. And we have flow sheet simulation and the digital twin offline sitting and interacting with the process plant. So for us, I think reinventing the technology, skilling up our people and delivering the results through the complex hardware has been a part of our I would say genetics for quite long, and I would say to that sense, we feel we are confident of embracing the new digital as it comes in the shape of I4. For me personally and HPCL, I believe digitalization is about democratization of the data, because I believe that all the data in all the manufacturing plants gets created at the shop floor. But as we put higher and higher skilled people on the shop floor, engineers and MTechs there, I think we also need to give them a sense of the decisions happening there. So I guess for me, the true sense of digitalization is the democratization of the data and the decentralization of the decision making. So I think we are out to achieve that and put the power of decision making the people who are behind the plants, so that the assets are in the hands of the people on the shop floor, and creating new assets is happening elsewhere. So for me, I think that is what I would say. Going forward, we have embraced upon a corporate-wide program called Parikalp, where digitalization in all its current manifestation, right from footfalls into our retail outlets and predicting demand and forecasting what's beyond the horizon. We have embarked upon this pre-COVID itself, and I think we are in that sweet spot now to take advantage and go across this challenge. Regarding the future, I guess the future, the companies that probably would see through the storm, I think these companies need to be integrated both across the supply chain and the value chain. When I say supply chain, it means probably if you are looking at an energy company, you need to be there in every sense of the way energy is unfolding. And if you say value, if you're dealing in hydrocarbon, I think you need to take the hydrocarbon molecule to where the value in the future would generate. So in that sense, on behalf of HPCL, I would say that we are again on a sweet spot because our capex cycle is now on the upturn with new refinery that we are setting up, and we intend to ride the low capex cycle in terms of cost, and then come back into the market to when the demand on petrochemicals, and that would again re-establish. So as far as we are concerned, we are confident that we would be better off on the other side of this challenge. We are into this, as I said, digitalization for a long time, and we have a demographic spread in our company where we have the middle-aged, experienced people and the very young, enthusiastic and energetic people. So I think, and we are seeing the demographic going into 2040s and 2050s, and we have mapped the leadership across all these age groups. And I think, as somebody of the co-panelists did mention, it's the people that finally who would be fighting these battles, and we have to be only equipping them and giving them this vision beyond. So I think from an HPCL perspective, all our capex cycles, we believe in the future. We are investing hugely in petrochemicals and the digital technology. And in this crisis, we have also seen a lot of resilience in our teams and the front leadership. I think the refinery and almost across all our locations, we have seen almost everybody at a leadership role leading from the front. So that also is a very important aspect. So this would be my brief response, Anirban, to your question.
Thank you, Mr. Shenoy, and thanks for straddling the two ends of the question across digitization and technology. And I'll pick up on the last point you made, Mr. Shenoy, and let me go to Mr. Ranganathan. I think we have time for one more question before we do the summary roundup. And Mr. Ranganathan, as Mr. Shenoy was talking about the people side of it, that to lead with leadership, and in this current situation, and you've been there across both with IGL and now with GAIL, and you must be looking at a lot of such issues in terms of how to look at the safety, security of people walking into the office but not feeling like they're walking into a war front every day. How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep the younger people energized and taking the organization along? And one is the learnings that we get from this particular space, the time of COVID. But what do you see going forward, the approach to people, resources, to work environment will be going forward? So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, let me confirm that, I fully agree with the view of the panelists that digitalization should actually bring about effective solutions rather than just display of data through blackboards. We in GAIL also have been going through a digital journey for quite some time now. And the average age of employees in GAIL is quite low compared to other companies because the company itself is only 35 years old. So our people have been actually, very apprehensive in the initial stages, but then being the type of business that we are in, we have to actually keep the gas going because 40 lakh domestic customers are there, and some fertilizer and power industry was our bulk consumer. And these two things, cannot be stopped because the whole life will come to a stop. So, but our manpower showed tenacious grit and determination in working without a gap or without any disruption to the gas supply. This we could achieve only by way of the leadership showing the way. Our top management was, always in the office, always available to people, whereas our, lower level people were allowed to work from home, 66% from home and 33% from the site, because we also need to have a lot of site work going on, the maintenances and all these things like refineries. And we have to keep the city gas companies going. So our gas also cannot stop. And another thing that, Mr. Gautam also said, what we did was, take care of the customer and as well as the supplier. We had to be very flexible on the contract side. So some of our customers were actually not very much forthcoming on the applicability of force majeure provisions, but we were proactive and gave them force majeure condition, leverage in the contracts that is there. So that, and the similar thing we expected from our upstream suppliers also, which they cooperated. So this is an era of, when we are coming out of that ironclad contracts and operating that without being application of might. And lastly, I'll say the learnings, of course, have been that there is an alternate way of doing things. What we were doing is not the only way to do things. And we may have other ways which will provide greater efficiency. And also another great requirement that has been realized is the leveraging of technology for a greater efficiency and operations in customer relationships as well as the management of assets.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Nathan. I think we are at time, and I got a note from Pippi that we may have a 5 or 7 minutes more. I'll maybe just take one question from the audience, and that's more of a question that has come from multiple people. And quite anticipated, the discussion is always about what is happening to electric vehicles and the disruption in mobility. And Mr. Shenoy, if I can get your thoughts on how do you see that playing? How are you looking at that impacting specifically downstream mobility fuel demand in India over the next few years? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my response would be that going forward, I think the fuel and the energy space, we have to be looking at newer options coming in, and batteries definitely will have a space somewhere in the future. But we currently believe that, as one of my co-panelists did mention, that fossil fuel and variants like petrol, diesel, gas, I think they will still dominate. And while that happens, I think the industry should be looking at taking the molecule to petrochemicals. Having said that, I think all the OMCs, particularly HPCL, we are investing very deeply into research in batteries. So we are getting prepared for that. And I believe that our presence across the vast country in different formats gives us that when this technology matures, when it comes from the lab to the road, we are at both places currently in the lab and future in the market. So we are preparing for this, but I think it's still a long way to go, because replacing the current infrastructure and making the fuel in a new form reach a vast multitude of people with the current vehicle age profile and current spending habits of the Indian population, I still see that you could still invest, get your money back from new projects, and let the battery thing happen on its own. But yes, I think we need to invest in technology, in research, and HPCL, and I believe all the OMCs are doing exactly that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. We'll do one last roundup of your closing thoughts from each of the panelists. And we have in the audience today a large number of young oil and gas professionals who would be looking at the future, wondering about what is the future going to look like for India, for their own careers. Also in terms of the new exciting things that are happening in technology and the change in working that is going to come forward, and that will impact their lives directly. So if I can start again with Mr. Srivastav, yourself, and then the rest of the panelists, what would be your closing message to the audience?
Yeah. So like everybody, my colleagues, panelists, and as well as your thoughts on the scenario which is going to unfold is on the same lines. As far as the exploration is concerned, everybody agrees exploration has to continue and it will continue. And if I can tell from being an explorationist, I will just quote two things. Number one is, nothing is more costlier than the missed opportunities, number one. And number two, perseverance pays more so in exploration. So if I can quote one example, one live example from ONGC's perception, ONGC's historical exploration history. So what has happened is when we GC started going for exploration, it started from Assam, let us say. As Mr. Oscar said, the biggest size that was anticipated was taken up for the first well to be drilled. And that prospect, when it was drilled, based on that data, whatever understanding was there, so drilling result was unsuccessful. So ONGC, as said, moved to other opportunities, and discoveries started coming one after another, one after another. So, but what happens in exploration? You keep on conceptualizing, keep on making new models. So that data was also being thought of. New data was collected. And it was more than 20 years when we had gone back there with the new data and with the new model, and we placed that well on the same prospect in a different way, that became a huge success. In fact, the rate that we recovered was about more than 200 meter cube per day kind of thing. If you convert into barrels, it's something much more what you get today now in offshore also. So perseverance, and there are many stories like that. And if I quote the last years, COVID or no COVID, exploration continued and we made 12 discoveries. We monetized 22 discoveries. And coming with this first quarter itself, by the end of this quarter, we have already notified about 5 discoveries in the first quarter also. Our finding costs have come down to, in 1920, at $3.55 per barrel. So with that, the scenario, the acreage acquisition, with the models to go for the newer plays, the scenario is going to be good. And that, let's not forget that in India, the energy demand, being a national oil company with the mandate, will keep on working for that and will try to ensure the energy security for the country as such. And there is a huge scope for carrying out exploration in India, especially opening up of additional some 13 new sedimentary basins which are going to be opened up based on the new data that is being collected and opened up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oscar. Oscar, if I can ask you to go next.
Hi, thank you. Thanks. I actually believe that after COVID, the world economies are going to recover exponentially. I think there's a lot of, during COVID, there's a lot of transition from money that used to be in energy to other areas. And now when the world recovers, we're going to see the exponential growth. Therefore, we're going to have alternate energy and oil and gas as a space for both to coexist. We are going to have room for coexisting. And where I believe oil and gas is the base fuel of the world. And then alternate energies provide those peaks and loads support. This also means for me that gas power is going to take even a bigger role. In the US, the gas, the natural gas produced is very low cost, and also here in India. And I think it's going to play a bigger role to make sure that we go from gas to power and empower those industries and those houses cleaner and better. So with that said, and oil and gas being the base fuel for the growth, I believe in India, we still need to grow production so that then it really, then the domestic oil really becomes the base fuel. So completely aligned with this panel group. We need to, I will encourage the young leaders to be engaged in oil and gas and be committed to oil and gas. There's a lot of opportunities still. There's a lot of opportunities for improvement, and the world needs us. So that's my takeaway.
Thanks, Oscar. Gautam, if I can ask you to go next.
Sure, Anand. So I'm sure there's a lot of cricket fans here. I'm a big fan as well. You know, I still remember 2007 World Cup. India lost in the first round, and then we walked out. And I never forget this. What Rahul Dravid said. It's never as good as they say it is. It's never as bad as they say it is, right? So I think for a lot of our young professionals here, I would like you all to remember that. You know, it's a tough time. I understand. Stay resilient. We will come out of this. it's a fantastic industry. You won't even know the time you spend in this industry because we are always innovating. We are always coming up with technology. We are a pretty quick adopter of technology. I mean, yes, there's a instinct to keep comparing to the Googles and Amazons, but we are not far behind, right? We are pretty quick at that. It will keep you interested. It will keep you excited. Like I'm sure all of my co-panelists here can vouch for it. The decades we spend in this industry, we didn't even realize we spend so much time, right? So stick to it. This will pass, and there'll be a lot of opportunities for all of us in your own growth, in the growth of the industry. There's still a long time left for us, right? Okay. So stay optimistic. Cheers.
Thank you, Nagatam. Mr. Shenoy, if I could request your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say going forward to all the young guys that we should continue to believe in the India story, because I think that's quite real. I think India will be a happening place for many, many years to come. So being in India, we are quite lucky to be operating here. We should believe in the hydrocarbon story, because hydrocarbon has a lot of potential. It can go places, petrochemical, crude to chemicals. So this is going to stay. That's going to be forever. Energy is going to be forever in this country and the world. So we should actually be looking at ourselves from being a petroleum company to a hydrocarbon company to an energy company, and we should evolve. Mobility will, in some way or the other, continue for ages to come. So with this, I think the future is there for us to co-create and innovate. A small thought on the 4 C's. I think we're talking about C for COVID, and I think the COVID is also because we are a connected world. That's why this pandemic spread so fast. But I believe the solutions will also come because we are a connected world. We will collaborate in this connected world, and having connected and collaborate, we will co-create the solutions. And finally, a quote from Steve Maraboli that life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. It's that we only get stronger and more resilient. I think with that optimistic note, that is how I would like to give my concluding remarks. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. That's very well put. Mr. Ranganathan, if I can have you have the last word.
Thank you, Anirban. I feel that in the manpower sector, we need to have more, strong systems and SOPs for the workforce in the oil and gas sector. And they should be more inclined to leverage technology as part of their day-to-day work. Also, I agree with all the panelists that the hydrocarbon sector is here to stay, and I can foresee that fossil fuel will be in the forefront until next decade, and especially in view of the demand from specific new sectors like, the added demand from petrochemicals, city gas distribution, etc. Being natural gas is a cleaner fuel, and we in GAIL believe that natural gas would continue to be a consumer's choice along with other renewable options for the energy needs of India. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, panelists. And I'll maybe just have a last 1 minute of wrap up. And it's very heartening to see a very consistent view across the room in terms of, and I just believe from Oscar's note, who feel it's like coming out of this COVID, there will be exponential growth in the energy basket, the mix, what it might be, but there is going to be a consuming economy. However, the future might require different skills, different operating models across technology, collaboration, innovation. And Mr. Shenoy, your 3 C's were very well put, COVID aside. And I'll just maybe end with Gautam in line with your sports metaphor. I think in the past we have been a strong link world where the focus was like basketball. You always focus on the Michael Jordan, the strong link. Going forward, we might become a football team which requires the weakest link to be as strong because one goal can make the match for you. So as we create a strongest soccer team in the world, the young and the new professionals would require everybody from a goalkeeper to a defense to a forward. So look forward to building this whole energy basket for India together. But thank you so much, panelists. It was a great, amazing, engaging session. And thank you so much.